Welcome, everyone, to another special edition of Portsmouth This Week. And I, as your host, Bob Poniatowski, and temporary, dealing mostly with the school department here in Portsmouth, one of which everyone seems to be supportive and proud. And to sort of wind up our interviews with school personnel, we have a person who's in charge of the pupil personnel. She's the director of the Pupil Personnel Services in Portsmouth. She is Lisa Colwell, and an EDD. How envious I am of you, Dr. Colwell. Welcome to the program, Lisa.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So glad you could be here. And you bring a special kind of flavor to the program in Portsmouth. Tell us a bit about what brought you to Portsmouth and a bit about your background.
Sure. So I actually was drawn to Portsmouth for reasons of an opportunity to be able to develop a program. The Portsmouth School Department, effective July 1st, is going to be withdrawing from the Newport County Regional Program. And it's an exciting opportunity to be here because it's an opportunity to build a program from the ground up to meet the needs of Portsmouth students. I think that I do come with a great background to work with the children of Portsmouth, the teachers, and the central office, in that I have been an administrator for just a little over 10 years in special education administration. I do have a degree in educational leadership, both at the master's level as well as the doctoral level, where I earned that from Johnson & Wales University.
It sounds like the school committee picked the right person. You have both the experience of working with a special population and also as a former leader.
Yes.
I realize that the courses at the master's and doctoral level in leadership have very much to do with education and making changes. And it's fun to start. I say maybe it's not fun. Yeah, it is fun to start a new program. I've had that experience, and I can appreciate how you feel about.
It is. It's an exciting opportunity because I think that it offers Portsmouth a fresh opportunity to examine its current structures, from supporting kids with disabilities to looking at new opportunities that may present themselves. So yeah. I'm very excited to be here, and people have been incredibly welcoming.
I can sense that you are, and I would be, and I have been in the past with a similar experience at the middle school. When the middle school was developing in another community, I was involved with that planning and so forth, and it's just great. Most of the time, as a professional, you move around from town to town, and you run into something that's been there, and you sort of just come on, but you are starting fresh, and that's great. For the benefit of our viewers, tell us a bit about the federal and state laws that govern the services that you provide, the services that are required. How does that work?
So in special education, we're governed by the federal law called the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or the IDEA as we know it. And IDEA was instituted under an original law called PL 94-142, which occurred back in around 1975, 1976.
I remember it.
And it has now since been known as the IDEA. So the IDEA governs all services for students identified with disabilities, so that they can be offered a free and appropriate public education, or FAPE as we know it. And basically what that means is that that students with disabilities are entitled to educational services at no cost as part of a public education program. The additional part to that is that they're afforded a free and appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment. And when we talk about the least restrictive environment, we talk about the place that's really closest to general education, where typical peers of similar grade and age levels are educated.
It sounds like you've been reading the rule book, and it's very demanding, and you don't have much of a choice. What is the age range? You start at K? And you
Actually-
go to 12, and what about ages?
So actually, the IDEA covers an age span of age 3 through 21 in Rhode Island. So students as young as being in pre-K come out of what we call early intervention, which is a birth through aged 2-month, 2-year, 12-month birth date. And students can be referred out of early intervention, or they can be referred when they turn 3 and through, the age of 21 technically. And it doesn't mean that for students who receive services beginning at age 3 or age 5 that they will be eligible for special education
Right, but-
until age 21, because
Right.
that's an annual decision. But that's the actual age span that the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act covers.
Years ago, somebody said womb to tomb, and I see it coming closer and closer. Pre-K?
Pre-K.
Oh, my God.
In fact, we
You're
have...
going to be having to go to the hospital pretty soon, Lisa.
Well, in fact, we do have a pre-K program here in Portsmouth. We have it at the Melville Elementary School. We have a classroom that is integrated with typical peers and those preschoolers who have been identified with disabilities. And we're proud that we're going to be continuing to offer that again in the fall for our students.
At the other end of the scale, typically students who pass through a school system are in the range of 17, 18, maybe 18 and a half, and graduate. But this cap is 21. Does that mean that students are recycled going through, or if they don't meet certain requirements, they're still on board?
Yes, so most students typically will move on out of school, what we refer to as school-age programming at the 12th grade when they, receive their high school diploma. There are a select number of students that sometimes have not perhaps reached what we refer to as transition goals. Students with disabilities who may need some additional direct instruction in things like employment, independent living, post-secondary training, et cetera, et cetera. So some of those students, and typically, and I say this in broad strokes, typically it's those students who may have some more significant disabilities where they will remain in school-age programming after what we commonly know as the grade 12. Sometimes that can be a year, sometimes it can be 2 years, and sometimes it can be right up until they turn 21.
Sure, I understand. There's so much sort of artificiality in the way that we structure our educational system in terms of grades and ages, but people develop differently, and
That's
you're
correct.
not always in the
That's
third
correct.
grade, and some are ahead, some are behind. But the other thing is, in preparation for what the target date is July 1st.
Correct.
And you've been on
Correct.
board since March. And I think in our quiet conversation the other day, you said this is the planning and developing and thinking through stages. What kinds of things how are you dealing with lately?
So from the moment that I walked through the door, it was go. And by that, I simply mean I assisted the central office administration with developing its actual first special ed budget. Budget
Oh, boy.
that the
Get right
the
down to
school committee will
nitty-gritty, huh?
have local control over, if you
Yeah.
will. So the budget was the first aspect of what I needed to do. Since then, we have visited students who have been in regional programs so that we can ensure that as they return to Portsmouth, we know a little bit about them. That our staff has been able to talk with their teachers, that our staff has been able to, in some instances, do some observations of them, meet parents as needed, et cetera, et cetera. So that's been one aspect. I have been working to staff for the upcoming school year, so we do have openings that we are staffing ourselves relative to positions such as speech-language pathologists, occupational therapy, physical therapy, social work, I said speech already, and school psychologists. So those areas we're in the process of hiring for as well. Transportation has been a big part of what I've been working on. Connecting with out-of-district placements for those students who attend school placements outside of the district. Meeting with different different vendors who are currently servicing our students, meeting with ed surrogates. I've also had an opportunity, because I know that there is a larger military population here in Portsmouth, so I had the opportunity to meet with the education liaison, Janet McCarthy, to learn a little bit about the work that she does and how she and I can work together for those families who are coming in and who are here for whether a short duration or a longer duration, but part of a military, that are in the military. So that's just a little idea of what's been going on, but
I
it
wanted
certainly
you
has
to
been
say
keeping me
that.
busy.
I wanted you
Yes,
to say
yes.
all of the above.
And I've been trying to get to know the staff as well and making efforts in
Sure.
that regard, because
Yeah.
I'm grateful that my initial observations are that we have a wonderful, hardworking staff, and I really look forward to working with them in the upcoming year.
You hit upon an important process in this changeover, which is doing all this groundwork, and there's a lot of it.
There is.
So you walk in the door and they say, "Okay, here's your budget." What, you want me to spend money already? I need to buy furniture, I think.
Yes.
But and I'm sort of elated that this kind of bridge building is occurring with the teachers on board here and the teachers in the region, and so that there's some dialogue, and parents and kids and teachers are not, there won't be any jolting. In other words, okay, we've been doing it this way, we're going to do it that way. There are bridges. It sounds like you're
There are
doing
bridges, and change takes time. So,
Oh, boy.
so as we move and we transition into this new model of what I'll refer to as local control, change takes time. I think one of the things that it's important for me to do as a leader, and I believe that I've been doing a lot of this, is doing a lot of listening, learning about the processes and procedures that are currently existing relative to special education, and really kind of thinking that through in terms of how we proceed for the upcoming school year.
listening skills, huh? Listening skills. What is the scope? You mentioned partially some of the people that are going to be on the staff, and so I wanted to know or tell us what the scope of the services that you offer. You mentioned speech pathologist, and so review that again
Sure,
for us, because
sure.
it's quite a team that you have there.
It is, it is. So, special education is a wide breadth of services. So the services that would fall under my office currently are the special educators, those folks who are providing special ed services, or from an academic perspective or social emotional perspective from special educators, the speech language pathologists, the occupational therapists, physical therapists, nurses, any sort of other, I'll call them more low incident providers, such as teachers of the visually impaired, teachers of the hearing impaired. For other areas under the office, not so necessarily service-based, but I'll also be responsible for Section 504 for students, so students that have 504 plans. And a big part of what we're doing, which also kind of ties into your question about planning, is the extended school year program. So under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, students are eligible at an annual decision-making point to determine whether or not they're eligible for what we refer to as extended school year services, which basically examines, whether or not students are going to experience significant regression in their skills, significant issues with recruitment or breakthrough skills. So that's a large part of what we work on throughout the year, and more namely, at this time of the year.
I'm not going to let you off the hook. What is the 504 thing? What does that mean? That's just 3 digits as far as I know.
It is. So
what does it mean?
Section 504 is another federal regulation. It actually started for accommodations in the workplace that affect what we refer to as more life skills, so hearing, talking, walking. Over the years, it has more or less, I will say, spilled, for lack of a better word, into the educational setting. So typically for students who are qualified for 504 plans, as we commonly know them, it's usually many times for health-related issues that are affecting everyday life skills. And usually students are serviced through what we refer to as accommodation. So what kind of accommodations might a student need in the classroom? It's separate and apart from special education. To be quite honest, sometimes it's seen as the secondary JV sort of team from the special ed perspective, but it's not, and nor has it ever been intended to be that. It's an accommodation plan for students who have a medical issue that is affecting the life skills, and the life skills are outlined in the regulation.
And I'm amazed at the categories and the labels that you assign
Yes.
to each of these life skills and accommodation extended. It's for the general public and the taxpayers who support this program to sort of comprehend that. But I hope, as a result of the conversation we're having, that they'll appreciate more the kinds of things that you have to deal with to effect this law. What I was kind of curious, there is an American Disabilities Act, and I think most of that seems to be aimed at the physical, but in a school setting, you'd not only deal with the physical thing, but with social, emotional, psychological, and most of all, learning. Right? There's a learning disability.
There is.
That's sort of invisible. You don't have a little card you put on your head, I'm learning disabled, but how do you deal with these various things? I mean, I know the answer is individually, but
It is.
Yeah.
So, there are, under the IDEA, there are 13 disability categories that students can become eligible for. Not one disability category or another comes with a certain prescribed amount of services. So a student that's been identified with a disability, regardless of what that disability is entitled via their IEP team to make that determination, the full breadth of services that's offered, whether through a special educator, an adaptive physical education teacher, speech language services, occupational therapy, et cetera, et cetera.
If I were to use a medical model, it would be there's some testing and evaluation, and then the people involved get together as a group, discuss and come up with some kind of a prescription.
That's
now
correct.
that the diagnosis has been done.
That's correct. The similar to that, while we're not a medical model, the process is I would
Well,
say
that's what I
is
meant.
comparable
Yeah,
in
yeah.
terms of how we make those decisions. But our goal when we look at who qualifies for as a student with a disability and requiring an IEP is, does the student have a disability? And it's a three-prong approach. Does the student have a disability that significantly impacts them in the classroom to the degree that they require what we refer to as specially designed instruction from a special educator? So in order to receive an IEP, or for a student to be eligible, is probably a better word to say, they have to require specially designed instruction from a special educator.
I want to deal a little bit with the buzzwords, because those people outside of our sphere often get confused by all the nomenclature. What is an IEP?
Sure. So an IEP is what we refer to as an individualized education plan. So that is the plan that's developed when a student is determined to be identified with a disability requiring special education instruction. It's an annual plan.
Annual.
So it's reviewed by a team on an annual basis. And every year that team's required to come together to look at the data, to look at the progress of the student, to examine the student in totality, and then make a decision if we're going to develop another plan, if the student continues to qualify for services, and go through the process of ensuring, again, I'm going to go back to those words that I use, that the student is having a free and appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment.
Yeah, comment a bit on what you mean by general education. You gave me a definition, but it was sort of, and it had to be sort of abstract or general, but put me in the school, and where is that student in the general education? Is he, she taking phys ed? Is she taking art? Is she taking English with everybody else? Or
So general education is just as you described. It's the second grade teacher, Mrs. So-and-so or Mr. So-and-so, who has typical second grade students in their classroom. Art, music, PE, those are general ed classrooms as well. So when we're looking at the services that students need, we want them, the IDEA was designed to ensure that kids would be able to access those classrooms or those classroom settings with, special education and related services. The speech, the OT, the PT is what we know as the related services.
the other expression that you use often, and just for matter of clarification, least restrictive environment. What does that mean?
So least restrictive environment is, we have a continuum in special education when we look at student placement. And sometimes that is, not sometimes, the placement in general education is the least restrictive environment, the place where students are receiving all of their instruction from a general educator. And on the continuum, it moves to a point of more of an isolated sort of setting. So we may start in the general ed setting. Sometimes there are students who receive what we refer to as pull-out services outside of general education. That could be on a part-time level, could be on a full-time level. We have some students that attend placements outside of the district in what we refer to as therapeutic day school settings. So there's a myriad of ways that kids have their least restrictive environment determined.
What I find interesting is, having experienced these things historically, the two extremes were isolationism and you're like the others. And so if they were isolated, then they were in some room at the end of the hall and you didn't see much of them. The other way is throw them in the environment with the rest of the kids and survival of the fittest.
Yes.
And what you're saying to me, which I knew you would say, is that it all depends. Least restrictive environment, there's success there, that's working. Some problems in certain areas, pull out and deal with those with the view of integrating back again, always in and out. I hope that that's clear to people, because I think it's an important situation. Deal with the standardized tests. There's a lot of talk in the paper about the PARC, so-called PARC test. Every student's going to be required to take it. Some people are opting out and all that. Where does that leave your students or the students in your program trying to compete for or succeed in a diploma and or a certificate? Comment on that, please.
So the PARC is the state assessment that the state of Rhode Island has adopted for its state assessment system. In this state, there are two options for state assessments. The first one is PARC, and the second one is what we refer to as NCSC, NCSC. NCSC is the one I'll talk about first. That is the alternate assessment, what we commonly knew as Rhode Island Alternate Assessment. The new assessment instrument is the NCSC, or the NCSC. The NCSC is for a very small population of students. Given that it's an alternate assessment, there are alternate standards that students are evaluated or are assessed on. So it typically is 1 to 2% of the special ed population, meaning to say that what you can equate that to is it's the most probably significantly disabled students that we may have who may be in more significant disability classrooms who are qualifying for the NCSIC. Outside of that, every other student is expected to take the PARCC assessment. So there are no, if you will, opt-outs, or there are no waivers for students with disabilities to not take the PARCC assessment. They are expected to take the PARCC assessment like every other student in the state. When you talk about graduation, we know that right now there's a hold on using a state assessment as part of the graduation requirements. Yes. However, again, for the students with disabilities who, whether they're in elementary or middle school or even high school, there is still a requirement that those students take the PARCC assessment as part of their educational program.
It's sort of interesting the way that we've gone through a period where the diploma, quote, meant something, and then we went through a stage where kids were sort of pushed along or moved from grade to grade, and then when they walked across that stage with their paper, everybody was happy except people realizing that they didn't master the basic skills and knowledge needed. And so that's turned around to, we've got to raise that standard, but now the special populations have to meet that standard too, to get that paper.
Yes, they do.
And it's not going to be a pass down or pass around or keep grandma happy that you got a piece of paper. Yeah,
the graduation requirements have become much more rigorous through the years. I mean, when this first started back in 2008, the graduation system changed drastically, and we've seen different revisions through the years of what we refer to as the secondary regulations that govern the diploma system, and it's very rigorous now for students to be able to earn a diploma. And for special education students, that bar certainly has been made higher, and it's required us to really look, whether it's here in Portsmouth or any other community, it's required us to look at the quality of instruction for both general education students and special education students.
We owe it to them. We're winding down on time, and I want you to comment briefly on a meeting and greeting parents event coming up shortly. Tell us about it.
Yes, I'm very excited about that. So as part of my transition and my transition into the district, I think that it's important for families to be able to, I'll say, put a name with a face. So I have been working with a group of parents who are willing to help me in this endeavor, so that not only can we establish a meet and greet, which is actually scheduled for May the 27th from 6 to 8 at the Portsmouth Middle School Library. There'll be information posted in the newspaper, on the website, and flyers. But I think that this will be a wonderful opportunity for families to come out and to meet with me and hear a little bit about what we've been doing to prepare for their children come July 1st.
Beautiful. We're right on the mark. Lisa, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you. It's been a
pleasure. And folks know about that meeting on the 27th to meet and see Lisa in person. Until next time, this is Bob Poniatowski saying goodbye for Portsmouth This Week.